What's up, friends? Hope you all are doing well and staying creative. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make minimal/micro house drums. I'll be going over my track Intrusive Thoughts that recently came out on Darker Form Records. And if you want the project file for this track, it will be available on my new website. Woo! Yes, right, I have a new website. I'm gonna be putting up sample packs and project files. And if you need any services from me, like mixing, mastering, stem mastering, etc., you can go on my website and check out the stuff that I offer. So without further ado, now let's get into the video. When it comes to minimal genres of music, you want to approach the percussion differently than you would tracks that are oriented to big clubs and festivals. The percussion here is a lot tighter, the drums are much shorter, so there's more space in the mix. And that allows you to have a lot of these little tiny elements that feel more cerebral, right? That's kind of how I like to describe these drums. They're heady. So let's start with the kick, right? That's the fundamental of the dance track and the fundamental of the groove. When it comes to picking out your percussion, it's very important that you start with the right sounds. You don't want to try to make a bad sample sound good. You want to start with the good sample and then make it better. So that's what I've done here. The kick, just have this sort of minimal kick sample that I got from a sample pack. I'm just taking out the decay, tighten that up, and then have a little bit of dip in the EQ to get rid of some of that boxiness. And after that, it's just going through some light compression. With minimal and micro house, I tend to be pretty light on the processing, again, because you have more space in the mix. You don't have all these different sounds trying to compete for the headroom. So generally speaking, I find that you can go lighter with the processing, especially when you pick out good samples. So I have two kick layers here. One is just the main kick layer for on the floor. And then I have this alternate kick layer here, which is providing kicks on the offbeats, which is just adding to the groove. So we can listen to that. It really helps the groove, especially in the low end. And with this kick pattern, I actually have another kick pattern here too. So there's a 4 on the floor kick, and then every now and then in the track, it switches to this breakbeat pattern. And when the breakbeat pattern happens, I get rid of these alt kicks because I just don't need them anymore. But that's something I like to do a lot, is mix it up between a 4 on the floor and some little bit of breakbeat. Next, we'll go over to the main percussion bus, all these things that are grouped into here that says drums. So starting with the first one, which is this acoustic drum sample. I really like this. It adds a lot of depth to the overall drum groove. And all I've done here is I found all these jazz drum loops, and I chopped them up and just sparsed them out throughout the track. So I just took all these different ones. But it adds a lot of character to the drums. Especially with those rides and hi-hats. And again, not much processing here, just some compression to take care of some of these transients. You know, as you can see, some of the drums hit louder than others, so I want to even out the volume a bit. Then there's just a little bit of volume automation just to bring up this one section of the track. And that's going into a reverb. So, like I said, very light on the processing when I can. The next thing is this background percussion loop. This one is just providing the background percussive ambiance, as I like to call it. And these are pretty important. If I take this out, it just feels like there's an empty space in the track. And so while this is subtle, it really helps just fill in that space in the back of the mix. And this is just the loop that I found. Pretty nice loop, if you ask me. Just shaving off some of the high frequencies, side chaining to the kick, and then I have a bunch of volume automation going on. So I'm like bringing it up, bringing it down, and that's constantly changing throughout the track. And that, you'll see that's a common theme for a lot of these the channels here, is I'll have volume automation that's just doing these slight volume adjustments throughout the entire track. So just so that all these drums are just ebbing and flowing with one another. And it also allows certain drums to shine at different parts of the track. So that's how here I can have some of these drum samples or these loops play for almost the whole track, but it doesn't get boring or repetitive because they're fading out, they're coming back in, and they're playing off of each other. So that's pretty important to do. Next, we have another perk loop. This is again sort of providing a little bit of that background ambiance, but this has a hi-hat in it, so it's adding to the main groove as well. And with this, I'm just taking this loop, shaving off the low frequencies, adding some compression to even out the volume. Very quick attack and release on that compression. A limiter, which is doing the same thing. Another high pass, low pass, just to shape that sound. That's going into a multiband compressor. The multiband is literally just to help take care of this 3K band, which around 2-3K, it tends to be a little bit harsh on our ears. We're very sensitive to those frequencies. So when you're playing this track super loud, those hats, they stick out a little bit. So I'm using the multiband to tame that frequency range. This plugin right here, Kickstart, is pretty much like a sidechain kind of plugin. It's just creating that pumping effect. And then again, some more volume automation on this. So as you can see, we have that continually changing throughout the course of the track. This drum loop, I'm also shortening the length of the drums by using this warp function here. I like to do this on most drum loops just because I find they are usually too crowded. So what you can do is you can come into the warp settings, make sure you're on beats, come into here, make sure you're on transients, make sure this is set to the forward play mode, and then what you can do is adjust this knob, and as you set it to 0, it makes the drums very short. At 100, it's playing at its full length, but I just have it set to about 60, 62. So it's just shortening them a little bit. So next we have some claps here. This one right here is a very short mini clap, as I like to call it. I'm just taking this one little part of this drum loop, just a clap. And it honestly, even though it's a very small sound, it adds a lot to the groove and just sits with the kick. If I take it off, it's still grooving, but it's not the same. And I'm using a gate here just to soften up the initial transient of that clap. I find that, especially with the Korg Electri, but even just a lot of clap and hi-hat samples, they have a very sharp attack and they take up a lot of headroom in your mix. So it's important to tame those initial transients. I like to use this gate to help with that. And then I'm shaving off the low frequencies, a little bit of the highs. I have a limiter on here, which honestly isn't really doing much. And that's just going into a reverb. Now on this next clap, this is coming from my Korg Electri ER1. I just recorded a very long take of me messing with the decay time on the clap. I like to do these long takes because it just makes the track feel more natural and kind of gives that live feel. And on this clap, I'm taking out the lows, adding a little bit of distortion because otherwise it's a fairly thin clap. So I have a tube just to fatten it up, going through an overdrive. And this overdrive, I'm parallel processing. So I have one chain that is just completely dry, and then another chain that's got the overdrive on it. And if you want to know how to do this, you just take any plugin, Command G, it groups it, and then if you go into here, it brings up all these, essentially your effects rack. So you can create a chain, and then now you have one dry chain that's got no plugins on it, no effects, and then you have another chain, which is your wet chain. Then the clap's going into a limiter, which helps tame that initial transient that I was talking about. So that's just gonna help give more headroom in the mix. Then it's going through a little bit of echo. You can kind of hear that little delay on the clap, and then some reverb. The next channel we have here is a shaker loop. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's a very basic shaker loop. Some volume automation happening here, cutting out the low frequencies. Then just a very slow auto pan. You can hear it just go slowly side to side. I have Kickstart, which is giving it that pumping effect. and then some quite a good amount of reverb just to set it in the back of the mix. I don't want this to be up front. Then we have a hi-hat from my Electron Digitact. This one also very self-explanatory. Super basic hi-hat pattern. Here I'm just panning it a bit to the left, shaving off some high frequencies and putting it through some reverb. Then we have the main hat. This one is also from my Korg Electribe PR1. Just an upbeat hi-hat. So this one as well, I did a really long take. I played it out for like 48 bars, messed with the decay time on the hi-hat, and added a couple extra fill hats every now and then so it doesn't feel like a 4 or 8 bar loop. It has a little bit more randomness to it. And then this is also going through a gate to soften up that initial transient. So if you listen without the gate, it's got a very sharp attack to it. And with the gate, it just softens it up a bit. And then I have that going through a reverb, and it's panned a little bit to the right, just spreading out my drums. I like to have the hi-hats a bit more spread out, because as you go higher and higher in frequency, you can spread things a bit more in the stereo field. So like with these hats, they're very high frequency, so you can go a bit more crazy with the panning. So I usually have one hat a little bit panned to the left, another hat a little bit panned to the right, and some of these other percussive things are just swirling around your head, like the shaker loop and some of those other loops above. The next thing we have here is just a shaker. Very simple, literally no processing on here, just a raw shaker sound. And that is it for the main drum group. And on this drum group, I have the drum bus plugin. So all these channels are being bussed into here, going through the drum bus plugin, which is fattening up, just to giving it a little bit of saturation, a little bit of compression. So that's gluing the sounds together. It's bringing up the volume of some of the quieter sounds, which just helps with the mix. Take this off. It's pretty subtle. I'm not trying to go too over the top with these effects. I want to keep them fairly clean. And then the next thing is a glue compressor, which is on 50% dry wet, so you get half of a completely dry clean signal, half of your wet signal, and just doing some light compression. There's a reverb on here, but this reverb sets at 0.4%. Honestly, I think this was unintentional. I don't think I meant to have this reverb on here. I can honestly delete it, or maybe not, who knows. But yeah, this reverb's not really doing anything. Then lastly, the last percussive element in here is these modular perks. This one is not within the main drum group because I didn't want it going through this processing. I wanted it to have its own processing. So, and this is a loop that I found, as you can see here, this big loop of just these random little modular ear candy sounds. So I chopped that up and put that throughout the whole track. So here's what that sounds like. All these little modular sounds that kind of also sound like whales. But then not too much processing. Like that's kind of the common theme here. Just rolling off some of the low end. Doing some fairly heavy compression here because as you can see it's a very dynamic sample. You have some of these that are much louder than other parts of the drums. You have some parts of the loop that are a lot louder than others, so I'm just evening it out, that volume. That's being sidechained to the kick, and then you have some volume automation here, just bringing down some of these parts which are a little bit too loud. So there you have it. That's all the drums for this track. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, leave a like, comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, would greatly appreciate that. And if you want this project file, like I said, it's available on my website. Go check it out, and hope you have a nice day. Peace.